What's up, y'all? I am here with David Hayward, aka the Naked Pastor. David, how you doing?
I'm good, John. How are you?
Awesome. And I'm sure nobody's ever made this joke before, but I can report to you on this podcast that the man is wearing clothes right now.
I am. I'm one of the most modest people out there, and I have the craziest name. So doesn't match, right? But I am super modest and shy. And here I've got this crazy name, Naked Pastor, for my artwork and my cartoons. So go figure.
Man, but I love it though. And so David and I met. I've been an admirer of his art for a while, but my friend Rob Fike, friend of the pod, has his own podcast, a couple of them. I freaking love this movie and Rebooted. He sent me, he put us in a DM thread together and really invited him on, which was really cool. Thank you, Rob, for being my talent booker there, which was awesome. But David, you make art that comes from your experience with church and all of those things. So why don't you tell me tell me a little bit about that story and what started you making this art?
Sure. So thanks for having me on your show, John, and hi to everybody who's listening. I've been in the church ever since I was born. I was born into the church. I'm Canadian, so I was born into the Anglican church. I was baptized as a baby, grew up through the church. We weren't ever loyal to any one certain denomination because we moved around a lot. We went to the most convenient church that we liked. So I didn't ever feel any denominational loyalty, but, so I've been Baptist, Pentecostal, you name it.
Right.
But eventually I went to a Pentecostal Bible college in the States. That's where I met my wife, Lisa. Then I went to seminary, became reformed in my theology, became a Presbyterian pastor, got ordained. And eventually we ended up in the Vineyard Church, which is kind of a mixture of Baptist, Pentecostal, evangelical with charismatic kind of expression.
Right.
And but then in 2010, I left the ministry. I'd been serving the church as a pastor for about 30 years. I'd been blogging as the Naked Pastor for about 5 years. I started that in 2005. And so I thought, well, I'm leaving the ministry. Why don't I see if I can make Naked Pastor
a thing,
full-time gig. And it took a few years, but here I am. I do Naked Pastor full-time, as well as my paintings and books and, other things that I do. And so I grew up in the church. I was around the church. I pastored the church. I've been in all different kinds of denominations, under all different kinds of leaderships, anything from high Orthodox liturgy, Catholic, to the craziest Pentecostal snake handling service you can imagine. I've been everywhere. I call myself I'm my own ecumenical movement because I've been in so many places. But I learned one thing, that the church is here to stay. I value the church. I appreciate the church. But can we please do it in a healthy manner? That's my concern. So a lot of my cartoons are challenging the church to live up to its mandate of serving the people. Sometimes I think the church gets it backwards, that the people are supposed to serve it. And so that's what I do. I challenge systems to live up to their mandate, as well as their representatives, leaders, authorities. And I try to encourage people to be to feel validated and encouraged in their own spiritual journeys. So that's sort of the double-edged sword of what I do.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. Where did the name Naked Pastor come from?
Well, I accidentally entered an auction for the website. I don't remember, but anyway, I got a notice that I'd won the auction. And I thought, oh no, how much money do I owe? And it was it was like $78 or something crazy, because obviously nobody else wanted it.
Yeah.
But at that time, the Naked Chef, the Naked Archaeologist, the Naked Truth, all that was coming at the time. And I thought, I want to blog as a pastor, but I don't want it to be like other pastor blogs. I wanted people to be able to see what the life of a pastor was really like, with all the struggles, conflicts, doubts and fears, financial struggles, anger, I wanted to pull open the curtain so people could see behind it what really goes on in the ministry. So that's what the naked means, naked pastor, just honest, vulnerable, transparent.
Yeah, man. And
Yeah,
I appreciate the authenticity. And it feels like maybe even more so now people are drawn to that authenticity. I
yeah,
don't know. First of all, blog boys, shout out to the early 2000 blog boys making it happen. But I think people are even more drawn to the authenticity now, like to see things in a naked way, right? Without
yeah,
covering, without artifice. And so I
yeah.
think that's really cool.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Back then, it was inappropriate, and I think I was ahead of my time. But now
Yeah.
it's kind of cool to be authentic.
Yeah, it is cool. Although I thank God you won it in the auction because I wonder what somebody else would have done with it. You're saving the world from something horrible.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So I recommend people when they're searching for naked pastor that they use one word,
yeah.
naked pastor. If you use two words, you're going to see things that you can't unsee. So,
Oh, not safe for work alert. Yeah. Don't Google it. We'll put the links in the show, in the show description so that you could find it. Well, one of the cartoons, like the first time, like I know that I'd seen your cartoons, but the first
mm,
time I saw your cartoon that affected me emotionally, and we were
mm,
talking about it just a moment ago, was the one where there's a church, right, drawing, and there's people coming in the door, but then there's people getting put in the dumpster out the back,
mm,
and that broke my heart because I
yeah.
do think I, as part of a large church, working with large churches, having my own experience with church, I think that's how people have felt
Hmm.
sometimes in the church. And so art can be such a powerful way to
Hmm.
surface issues. That's what you talked about. And
Yeah,
your
yeah.
heart is caring for the church and loving the church, but
Hmm.
the art kind of surfaces the issue. So
Hmm.
when did you start like just drawing? Like, were you always an artist, or was that something that came about?
Yeah, I don't ever remember not drawing. My dad was an artist. I was always watching him paint and draw. So ever since I was a little kid, I've been drawing. But and I started my blog way back before it was Naked Pastor. I think my first blog name was churchpundit.com.
Mm,
How
nice.
pretentious, eh?
Yeah.
And so, and I would once in a while share one of my paintings. And one day, though, it was in 2006, I believe. I really love a good cartoon. Like, and my gold standard for me is the New Yorker cartoons. I just love them. And I thought I'm going to try to convey what I'm trying to convey through a cartoon.
Yeah.
And they just took off. And so I, started using that as my main means of communication
Right.
and expressing myself. And so I've been doing it now for 16 or 17 years.
Yeah.
I have thousands of cartoons in my arsenal. I just came out with a book, by the way, if I can mention it.
Oh, heck yeah.
Flip It Like This, which is my best of cartoons. So I'm really proud of it, and it's a really cool coffee table book, or something you can leave at your parents or gift to your pastor or
Yeah.
whatever. And but yeah, it was a lot of hard work to come up with like 125 best cartoons out of thousands. But many people who do follow me and like my cartoons will recognize most of them in there. So it's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Where
Yeah.
should we buy Flip It Like This? Should we
Yeah.
buy it through Amazon or should we buy it
Yeah.
directly from you? Okay.
Not for me. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, Indie Books. Somebody emailed me yesterday. I just found your book in Stowe, Vermont, a bookstore in Stowe, Vermont. So it's like it's
Nice.
around.
Yeah.
So just or your local bookstore can order it in for you.
That
Yeah.
would be awesome. Check out that book. What
Mm.
I'll get it for sure.
Thank you.
Would you say is your most popular cartoon? Like what is there one that's like stands out?
Well, if I can mention two, there's two of them right now that are very popular. The first one would be Eraser, and that's where it shows a bunch of people with fat pencils drawing lines in the ground, and they're drawing
Mm,
themselves into boxes. And then Jesus is in the center of them with his big fat pencil upside down, erasing the lines.
yeah.
And they all look frustrated that they're trying to separate themselves with lines, and Jesus is
Mm,
erasing the lines. I love that cartoon,
Yeah.
and so do a lot of other people. But another one is Overturning, where it's kind of an action cartoon where Jesus is flinging out his arms and tables and coins are flying everywhere, where he overturned the tables of the money changers in the temple.
Yeah.
And that's another popular one of mine. In fact, somebody just emailed me yesterday with a picture. They got it as a tattoo on their shoulder.
That's awesome.
It is awesome.
When you inspire tattoo art, that's like somebody
Yeah.
put it permanently on their
Yeah,
body.
that's
So
true.
that's
Yeah.
like hugely significant.
That's a whole other level. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think? So in all of your cartoons and these specifically, what do you think connects with people about those? Because for both of them, they're a little bit more, I won't say radical, but they're a little bit more of an active Jesus, right? A
Yeah.
little bit more of an active thing. So why do you think people connect with those?
I think what connects people with my work is that um, for many people, I hear number one, I'm not crazy.
Hmm.
I'm not crazy. I'm not alone. And also, this is the Jesus I fell in love with.
Mm.
And I've lost that, the sort of the radical, universal, compassionate, groundbreaking radical. We have a tendency to tame our heroes and domesticate them, but I think for a lot of people, this is the kind of message they resonated with when they first sense a spiritual awakening in their lives.
Yeah.
And it just touches, I think, their sense of love and justice and acceptance and authenticity. All these things people resonate with, and that's the kind of thing I talk about in my cartoons.
Yeah. Yeah. And man, the Jesus people fell in love with, that's such a beautiful way to put it, because Jesus is such an attractive, magnetic figure.
Mm-hmm.
And you see it in the scripture. You see it in the scripture, but as a pastor, you also see it in people's lives.
Yeah,
Like
that's right.
this Jesus that you're talking about, the Jesus that brings love, that brings this, draw the circle wider, that is talking to the notorious sinners, that are, that's speaking truth to power. This is a Jesus that people like are just drawn to.
Yeah.
And how do you think when people get involved into churches, sometimes it feels like they lose that Jesus? So why do you think churches can kind of tame Jesus like that?
Well, can you imagine having a church full of Jesuses?
Well,
That would
good
be
point. Good point.
complete chaos.
Right.
And so the church, and it's understandable, and it's the same with parents and teachers and the military and the medical field, the post office,
Yeah.
the where DMV, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
It control managing people becomes the priority because you don't want to mess, and you want order, and so it's just the nature of the beast where you get a few people together, a system starts to form. It needs to be organized. It needs to be managed, and as a result, it eventually loses its heat. It loses its fire because all the energy is going into the bureaucratic maintenance of the system. So I think if church can figure out ways to keep people in community while preventing the bureaucratic, I don't know, disease from
There you
leaking
go.
in, um, I think that should be one of the church's major challenges. And so I think that's what happens just over time. It's talked about in philosophy and social analysis and everything, where when a movement starts, there's just a lot of energy. The founder dies, it crystallizes into an organization, and then eventually it, cools.
Yeah.
And eventually dies. Another radical comes along. They start another movement. They die. An organization forms around.
Yeah.
This cycle. of how things go. And I think if the church can be conscious of that natural cycle, it is natural and it's totally understandable. But if we can somehow prevent that from happening and keep the energy, it's kind of like marriage. I've been
Mm,
married a long time. I've been married 42 years now. And well, it takes work to keep the romance alive, right? It's
yeah.
not, you have to, and a lot of it is preventing things from killing the romance.
Mm,
It's not like you're
mm,
trying to fan romance into flames. It's like you're trying to keep things at bay that will kill the romance. And it's
yeah.
the same with church. If you can keep things away, keep things at bay that will kill the romance,
Yeah.
kill the energy, kill the passion, then I think you're onto something.
Oh man, that is so cool. And I know that all my church staffers or former church staffers were nodding their head when you talked about bureaucracy,
Yeah,
of just like all that energy that goes to it. But I love that picture that you painted of, I mean, it's almost like the church is described as the bride of Christ, right? Of
yeah,
this marriage of
yeah,
not losing our love for our first love.
yeah,
And I think part of what you talked about is the institutional church, the organizational church, the 501c3 organization seeks to kind of control and order that,
yeah.
and keep it and crystallize it. Like you said, it's a natural process. It's not, that's not a critique of specific leaders or critique of a specific system. It's just the order of things.
Right.
But part of what you were talking about is instead of like creating this little bubble that other things can't get in, instead of creating this ordered system where it's self
Hmm.
driving, you're kind of talking about doing preventative work to not lose the love of your
Right.
first love, and that's what the church should be.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a, I gotta be honest, it's kind of a mind blower. Like it's simple, but it's also like that's a really cool
Well,
thought.
well, John, it's kind of like planting a garden. Like when you plant a seed, let's say tomatoes. You plant a tomato seed, and it eventually grows into a nice plant, and
Mhm.
tomatoes start to form. What's your job? Your job is not to pull the tomatoes out of the plant. Your job is to keep pests away, remove rocks,
Mm,
weeds, keep the earth soft, add
yeah.
nutrients, and so on. You can't force it to grow tomatoes. What you do is you create the environment for it to do what it will do naturally. And so
Wow.
that's my belief about church and community. When people gather together, if you just leave them alone and try to prevent things from going stale and becoming bureaucratic or becoming automatic, um, things will happen.
Yeah.
It will grow. So that's my belief about community is mainly keeping things out of the way.
That's a whole word though. Because one, I love the organic description of the church. I think
Yes.
a lot of us think of churches as factories now. Like
Yeah.
I think that industrial, and then as we're moving to digital kind of language and imagery creeps
Mm.
in. It's about efficiency, it's about
Mhm.
scalability, it's about
Mhm.
all of these things. Whereas if you're looking at it as a garden, like an organic thing, to your point, you can't make anything grow.
No,
You just try to create the conditions where things can
that's
grow well.
that's exactly. And so
Wow.
that's always my advice to pastors and churches and so on is provide the conditions. If you impose um, rules and so on how this should work. It's kind of like when you throw two lovers into a bedroom and lock the door, you don't need to instruct them on what to do.
That's true.
And so it's the same way about church or community. That is actually an illustration from Martin Luther, uh,
Mm,
the theologian.
yeah,
It really is true. So, and I think if churches can learn that and trust that process and not be afraid of the chaos,
yeah,
and just enjoy the creative chaos that it will bring. And I've experienced that in local churches. I've
yeah.
experienced that online, and I know it's true that when you just provide the conditions for a community to happen, it happens.
Dang. That okay. This is so like this is so counterintuitive, right?
Yes,
But
yes.
you put it in such good language that it gets me excited, right? Of you get me fired up. So how practically? Let's maybe make it a little more practical. How
Okay.
can we as pastors stay out of the way right?
Hmm.
How can we create the conditions for love, right? And
Hmm.
kind of stay out of our penchant for trying to control or to meddle too much. How do you think is what's a practical way for us to do that?
Oh man, there's so much. But I love using the analogy of a good, healthy family. So let's say with my family, I have a wife, a husband, father, and mother. We have 3 kids, they're grown. We basically provided the environment for our kids to become their most authentic selves.
Yeah.
We offered guidelines. We would give advice. Yes, there once in a while there were rules, but mostly it was providing uh, for them a safe place to grow up and learn how to become independent, self-determining, authentic uh, adults.
Yeah.
And it's like them in the car watching you drive for many years, and finally you're in the passenger seat watching them drive while they have their beginner's license, what we call their beginner's license here in Canada, where
Yeah.
they can drive, but you have to be in the car, and then eventually you just have to say, okay, you're on your own, and they drive. It's the same with the church. It's the same with any
Yeah.
kind of community. If you want that true, authentic community, you really do have to let go,
Hmm.
and you really have to relinquish control, and you really have to step back, and you have to allow you have to watch mistakes happen.
Yeah.
You have to trust people. And there will be some messes to clean up, but it'll be wonderful to watch the community develop into a healthier, more dynamic, and even um, an influential presence in the world.
Yeah.
I've seen it myself when communities are given that provided that kind of a space, the energy there is just amazing, and it overflows into the community around. So
Hmm.
that's my advice. Now,
Yeah.
it's hard for pastors
Whoo,
because
yeah.
we are we've been taught how to lead,
Hmm.
how to manage, um, and it's really really difficult to let go and let other people drive. But if you want true authentic community, that's what it's going to take. um, if you want to exercise control and strong leadership and visionary thinking and all that kind of thing, you'll get that kind of church, but it will not provide the authentic community so many people long for and look for.
Yeah.
And you have a choice. I'm
Hmm.
afraid you do have a choice,
Yeah.
and so yeah, that's Jesus. Um, in the Gospels is portrayed as a very freeing
Hmm.
kind of individual.
Right.
Basically, I'll put words in his mouth. Basically, he was like, "Follow me or not, I don't
Yeah.
care.
Yeah.
This is my truth,
Yeah.
and this is who I am." And sometimes there were crowds, and sometimes there weren't.
Hmm.
And that vacillating up and down, inconsistency, popularity,
Yeah.
notoriety, that up and down of his ministry is what happens. And it's the same in families. There were times when we had great relationships with our kids, and then we felt distant from our kids, and now we feel great again. And
Yeah.
that's just what community looks like when you let go of the wheel and you let people um, you know, take the steering wheel of their own lives. It's that kind of a risk.
Yeah. Man,
That was a
but
long answer to a short question. Sorry.
oh, that's a wonderful answer because you talk about a few things, but seasonality is one of the things, and
Mm,
seasonality is something that a more industrial or digital view doesn't accept. Right? We can get
right.
strawberries at the grocery store 12 months a year, but that's not how the cycle actually works. Right?
Right.
There's a seasonality to everything where in winter you eat certain things, in summer you eat certain things, and that's kind
Yeah.
of the environment Jesus was raised in, and probably why he came when he did, because he appeals to just natural metaphor a lot because
Yeah.
it's just how it worked, right? And
Yep.
so it, we have it a little bit different where it's like, if I want it, I can get it generally within a day, right? You order it from Amazon and it shows up and you get all kinds of fruit from around the world. And so this idea of seasonality and letting things cycle, it's kind of the opposite of the up and to the right visionary leader philosophy of you always have to be growing. You always have to be having new people. You always have to be making more money. You always have to be, okay, you're back.
Yeah.
I froze up for a second. And that is just the opposite of what Jesus is talking about. This seasonality is opposite to that, because you can't control that kind of growth. But you're also, I think the unique thing about what you're saying is you're also not in any way condemning growing influence or growing church, or it's just a natural cycle. It's a thing that will happen. And Jesus kind of showcased that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I appreciate that. The seasonal, and I experienced that in the churches I pastored and so on. But I don't know. I just had this sort of drive to be authentic and free, and knowing what it tasted like, I wanted the people in the congregation to feel that and sense that as well. So for me, the burning question is, so in a church, I think if a church struggles with this question, how can I be free without violating your freedom, Jon? And Jon, how can you be free without violating mine? If the church can struggle with that dynamic, I think they're on their way to being a healthy community. Because the kind of church that allows for people to be free, it's going to cause chaos, but that's the fun of authentic community. If a community is following rules for behavior, then there's no worries. You're preventing chaos from happening.
Yeah.
And I understand why churches do
really
that, because
does,
chaos sucks. But if you're not in a community and you want free people and you have to figure things out as you go, that is what community actually is. I remember I had a small group meeting in my home, and we were just starting, and this was going to be great, and we had all this enthusiasm about it, but we kept having to deal with issues in the group. I was like, we got to deal with this issue, and then once we deal with that, we can get on to the better things, and then we deal with this issue, and then next week another issue would happen. Okay, we have to deal with this, and I thought, man, if we could just get rid of deal with these issues, we can move on and be that community. And then it struck me, this is actually how community works. We're actually doing the work. No goal.
Yeah.
But that's what community is, right? So it's like with Lisa and I, my wife and I, we've been married 42 years. We have the romance, everything's there. But if we kept thinking, if we could just get past this, we could move on to the real passionate romance that we've been longing for. But actually, it's doing that kind of work that provides the space for the romance, right? That's the weeding and the softening of the ground and the nurturing of the ground. It's the hard work of providing the space for romance.
A lot of people listening to this might not be in positions of leadership in church, and they might just be kind of attending or figuring out where they stand with the church. I think a lot about them, because so much of the system has shaped even our leaders. You talk about, like, you got free and you were able to feel free and who you were and showing up and doing your thing. And so you wanted to pass that on. And it feels like a lot of our leaders haven't experienced that freedom. So it's hard for them to give it to people. And so for the people who are been in kind of a consumeristic system, they show up on Sunday, they sing songs, they receive it, they go into the programmatic thing. They're kind of on a, the way I almost think of it is like like a walking escalator, where it's just like, hey, this is spiritual growth, and you just kind of go through it and you just receive it and consume it. How can you switch from a consumer to somebody who's more free, like you're talking about?
Well, okay, Jon, you're opening up a big can of worms, because you need to want it. I mean, I'll admit, when I'm in the airport and there's an escalator sidewalk, I'm going to get on it because it's easier. And I've been a pastor of a church where I was encouraging freedom, spiritual independence, authenticity. I've got news. Many people don't want it. I actually had people sit down in front of my pastor's study desk and say,
wow.
we pay you to tell us what to believe.
I mean, it's not that surprising, but it's
Yeah,
also
I'm not
wow,
kidding.
right? Like,
And,
oh,
but that's, people prefer the security and the comfort and the predictability of the leeks and onions of Egypt than they do the promised land that they haven't seen yet, and the dangers that they have to walk through to get there. And so freedom is not easy, as we know. Like, we know stories of convicts who are released into the world, and they got to go to a halfway house, or many of them can't
yeah,
make it on the in the outside world, and many of them want to go back.
right.
They long to go back to that predictability, that security, that sort of comfort, and the fellowship and everything that they had there. It's really, really difficult to live a free life, but that's your choice: free with danger, or
Yeah.
in slavery
Wow.
with all the comforts that it
Mm,
comes with. And so it's the same in the church. A lot of people love being told what to do, what to think, what to believe, what to
yeah.
say. It's convenient. It's like that escalator sidewalk in the airport. And rather than pulling your own bag, walking that long mile to get to the
Yes.
next plane, like, many people prefer the easier one.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's just the human dynamic. I'm not judging. I'm just saying that's just a human dynamic. I learned that for myself as a church. When I was
Yeah.
saying we're gonna be free, we're gonna allow
Yeah.
others to be free, and I thought this church is going to blow open. This is going to like explode. No, we lost people, and and,
Yeah.
and so
What can you do? Like that,
that's
but,
just that's human behavior, and human. That's why church is so difficult. Church is not easy. And I've been there as a pastor for 30 years, where you know you want to be free. Pastors want to be free. They want to be raising
yeah.
free sheeple. I almost said, um, but
Mm,
they know the cost. They know the cost and the risks involved. But I saw this beautiful photograph of a Albanian shepherd, and he was. It
yeah.
was all the girls were saying, "This guy's a hunk. Like, this guy's just gorgeous." And it was this young, handsome man who's a shepherd, and in his rugged clothes, and just a really handsome fellow. All the sheep were ahead of him, and he would just follow the sheep wherever they were grazing. And very,
Mm,
very, very seldom do you see the shepherd out in front of the sheep. And sheep just basically go where the food is, and the shepherd
yeah.
watches: is there poisonous plants there, or are there dangerous animals, is there a cliff, all this kind of thing. But mostly shepherds just wander around with the sheep. And I think that's a good model for pastoring, where you're with your people, you let them wander, you're there
Yeah.
for guidance if they need it, and you're there to warn if there's if they need it, and so on. But that, to me, is a
Yeah.
great model for pastoring. But it's difficult. I get it. I totally get it. It's so much easier to provide rules, boundaries,
Yeah.
controls, stipulations, and structure, and all that
Yeah,
stuff,
man, what a
because it's
powerful
predictable and it
image.
prevents
And
chaos from
I
happening.
mean, shepherding is a great image. I mean, that's why what Jesus used, right? That's why, I mean, the word pastor really isn't in the Bible per se. Like he's calling them shepherds, right? And Peter, feed my sheep, right? And Jesus is using these shepherd
Right.
analogies. He calls himself the good shepherd. And so this idea of following the sheep, and again, preventing, right?
Mm.
Being preventative, to let them be free versus keeping them contained. That, man, that's a
Right.
whole word.
Yeah. It really does compare.
Yeah.
It really does compare to the tomato plant I mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
where you just keep things out of the way and it'll grow.
Yeah.
The same with sheep. They'll find the grass before you will. They'll find the water before you will. They can smell it, and just that kind of hands off, but you're there for them,
forever.
and they know it.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't really predict that this was all going to be about
but I love
pastoring,
it. But that's why the
past
conversation is so
churches,
fun,
did
because
we?
there's discovery in here. And like one of the powerful things to take is that there's a choice, and freedom is a choice. I heard a pastor once call it took the Israelites very little time to get out of Egypt, but it took 40 years to get the Egypt out of them. And that is what you're talking about. It's Jesus talks about us being free and no longer slaves to sin, but how do we become free people and not have the slavery living in us? Because we easily become slaves to something else, right? Another system that's over us that tells us what to do, because it's like, well, at least we had 3 square meals a day and a place to sleep, right? Like that's the Israelites every other chapter. And it's but then you don't get manna. Oh man, dude, David, you are awesome. I love this. We will have to have you back on and continue this. But before we go, there's a very important segment called the non-judgment zone of joy. And I always sing a theme song to it, because it started as like I was going to get a theme song and then I sing it. And I guess like the guys just keep me singing it because maybe they like to laugh at my singing. And I've been working on because I'm not a very good singer, but I work on customizing it for the guest. And so you're like a Canadian dude. And so I don't, so maybe I'll go with like, I'm trying to think of, I mean, I know that there's like Rush, but I don't know if I could do it in Rush style. Alanis Morissette, there's a lot of great Canadian artists. Celine Dion. Okay, there we go. We'll go with Celine. The non-judgment zone of joy, kind of an interpretation by Miss Celine Dion. It's the non-judgment zone of joy. I think I nailed it. Yeah, Celine, I am the greatest singer in the world. So the question is, what is bringing you joy right now?
Well, I'll tell you. For me, it's I have to get out of my head and just be in my body. So for me, it's going for walks, being out in nature. I live on a river, just going down to the river, being in the forest, taking the dogs for a walk, breathing the fresh air, forest bathing, as the Japanese call it. So for me, that's what's going to the ocean. We live near the ocean here, the Atlantic. So for Lisa and I, that's what we're doing a lot of. It's just being in our bodies on the earth.
I love that for me
is
fantastic. Hey, David, thank you for being a part of this. NakedPastor.com. Check his stuff out. He is on the socials. All your socials are Naked Pastor?
Yeah.
Okay. But don't search it separately, because you don't want nightmare fuel. One word, Naked Pastor. One word. Make it one word.
That's right.
Yeah, that's awesome. David, thank you for joining us. This has been fantastic. It has been a blessing to me, and I think it's going to bless others too.
Thanks, John. Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me on.